Okay, members, here it goes. I'm going to try. We were trying to explain. We are on page 3 of the Human Services Agenda, which is which had been a number that has been widely in flux in a variety of levels over time. Folks, before we left, explained that there is this provider fee possibility that increasingly folks believe is legal and will be accepted by the federal government if it's done correctly, as other states have managed to do that. And the compromise member proposal, if you will, the Senate had done a reduction based on just sort of a generic notion of 10%. The provider fee idea was not very well developed at that time. The number everybody just talked about, finance, was last year's enjoined savings, if you will, was about $200 million, give or take, right? The enjoined savings, which are a combination of a provider, a wage cap, a different wage cap than the existing law had, and a functionality, a way of dealing with functional service that everybody felt was uncomfortable with, and has now been enjoined by the court. All right, so that's where we were. That's the baseline for discussion. The Assembly, I think, did no reductions, tried to leave the program whole, acknowledging that we have no revenues here, and we are woefully short. The proposal is to adopt savings, total savings, for 10, 11, and 11, 12 of $250 million with placeholder trailer bill, where whatever the provider fee produces is a savings to the general fund, comes out of that 250. The balance to be done in a manner in consultation with stakeholders. I know finance has been having stakeholders meetings, everybody has. We want to devise the appropriate policies that perhaps are legally defensible, and with stakeholder input, perhaps the stakeholders who might otherwise sue coming to the table and saying, if we do it this way, we will not sue, would be the hopeful theory here, is the combination of both the provider fee and a consultation process similar to what worked in the DD regional center area, where folks agree on how those cuts might be taken, so that the total, however, whether that provider fee falls at 150 or 180 or wherever everybody decides it falls, the difference to 250 would be made up by the consultation reductions in service or in cost containment of another sort. And then, and it's for 2 years, because the second part of this motion is that we adopt placeholder trailer bill and everybody work on this to get a longer-term work group, a stakeholder work group during those 2 years to look at how to actually do the long-term savings in this program that one is hopeful could be achieved by greater merging of an integrated long-term care model that is consistent with our move toward Medi-Cal managed care for seniors and disabled folks. Basically, we're already moving toward mandatory managed care for seniors and disabled. We already have some in county-operated managed care systems where seniors and disabled have been merged in. I think Orange County, I'm not sure about Marin and some of those, whether they've merged them in, but there are movements in that direction. And the charge to this stakeholder group is to figure out, in the context of federal health care reform, where there are likely to be incentives for integrated long-term care, to try to start to figure out how to merge some of this IHSS services into that managed care model. So that it's clearly medically necessary, creates medical savings because you're keeping people at home. I mean, everybody knows that kind of works. And as you're going toward the primary home model, there will be a seniors kind of home care model. They're managed care for everybody. There ought to be a way that we manage IHSS, Medi-Cal services into a other Medi-Cal, Medicare services. So that would be the charge to the long-term stakeholder group to try to figure out how to get a long-term reform and change in the nature of the program. And simultaneously, given that we're doing these new cuts, we would repeal and thereby save lots of litigation costs, repeal last year's reductions, which have been enjoined, and just sort of stop that and start over, if you will. So that's the motion, for what it's worth. Mr. Nielsen.
Well, as I read this, it's $100 million less savings here in number one. Is that correct? We were at 350.
Well, there had been discussion of up to 350. The 200 is what it was last year, so it's actually $50 million above the savings that have been enjoined.
Well,
but it does include the provider fee, so that you have less reduction in services, although you get the same amount of savings. Was the
I
theory.
would just observe the conference committee today. I think it's going very much the wrong way. We're bumping up our problem somewhere like $36 million this morning, and whatever this amount is, $100 million or a little bit less than $100 million, we've exacerbated our problem. May I ask a question of finance?
I'm not sure. I mean, just for clarity, I think there had been discussion over the last month of a number up to 350. However, this is $250 million savings off the Assembly budget and an additional $100 million off the Senate budget.
Okay.
So the Senate budget had a reduction of $150 million,
Okay.
and this is $250. So we're going up $100 million in reduction.
Well, I think that's what I was meaning from where you were originally.
It's $100 million up
Yeah. from
there, not $200 million, though,
Okay.
is all. Yeah.
On this, the reduction, what's that particular status, that court case? I understand from staff that the court did remand a study be done. What is the progress of the study? How far is that from being completed?
Nick Buchan, Department of Finance. The wage study is in progress. The vendor that the state contracted with, we had to rescope given some recent information that we found out surrounding the litigation. And because it's still being litigated, we can't get into detail, but it's in progress.
Well, I'm not an attorney, but that would lead me to believe that the court was wanting more information. That would lead me to believe there would be a possibility of winning that particular action. Why would we concede it at this point then? I mean, my argument, we should just continue to fight this one out.
We would concur with that.
Okay.
Except that if their legal posture were the same, you would have provided the study to the court. And since so far Finance's position and the governor's position on the litigation, as I understand it, has been that they don't need the study, which is what the court asked for.
We're conducting a study. It's just not developed yet. It's not completed.
But is there any date? I mean, to comply with the court, you probably have given the court a time certain, have you not?
They refused in court. They contended in court that they don't need to do that and that they can do this without the study. So that has been their position in court.
The position is that in the court case, you're not going to comply with the court decision to do the wage survey then, or provide it to the court?
We are conducting the survey.
Okay.
And we do not yet know what that survey will indicate, but provided it would satisfy the court, then we would surely use that in our defense.
Okay. Well, it still sounds like there's a legal strategy here. There's a legal process at play. You're not just stonewalling the court.
Right.
I think what maybe the legal posture is fairer to say. What happened is they have appealed the decision of the court that required the study, which in court language says you still don't think you need it because you appealed the decision of the court that said that's what you should do. Rather than saying to the court, oh gosh, if that's all you need to do, let's put it over, they appealed the decision of the court that found that they needed to do the study. LAO is lending their head. They've probably actually read it, unlike me. But
well, it still would give me cause to believe that the administration feels there's a chance to win this.
Great.
Want to repeal just the other one? Going once.
Well, can't get me that far.
The elimination of the services is more troublesome to most people than the wage one kind of goes back and forth, and it is what it is. Yes, Mr. Leno.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the difference here between where we are today and last year is that we have a strong belief and found a pathway to move forward with this provider fee, and it's going to be a significant amount of savings to the general fund. We may have a disagreement over the amount of fraud or trouble with the system. That debate may continue, but this is a very successful program that provides important services to those in need, and we know that there is great risk that a significant portion of the served population could find their way into long-term care at a rate 4 to 5 times greater than the amount of money we're spending on the participants in IHSS. So to agree that we can come up with $250 million of real savings, not imagined savings or challenged in court savings, this is a victory. It's a conference compromise, and I think it deserves our support.
The only question I would have then is, how are these real savings when it's just placeholder language? And I don't understand how this is any more real than.
Well, they would have to develop the language. I mean, the reason to say placeholder is so the 4 caucuses, the LAO, the DOF can all get together and try to figure out. It'll have to come back to us, but it's to take the action to give them direction to go forward and design the thing that will have these appropriate savings in consultation with the folks.
So why not go for more? I mean, why limit them as to saying only 250? Why not?
Because we think that's all that's achievable, and it does meet the thing of more than what was last year's enjoined savings.
200, that's coming from the provider feed, and the number I was kind of focusing on was closer to like a $600 to $700 million savings is what I was trying to focus on. And but if you
we can't think of any way to do that.
I'm just saying that when you cap it and say don't give me any more savings than this, I mean, I don't. Isn't that what this is actually doing by putting an actual target number in there?
I think, I mean, that was the discussion we had earlier. I think kind of where a lot of us got to was we just don't see any way to get, without new litigation problems, to get higher than that number. We know we can get more or less to that number in some real way. I don't know how to get there to the higher number in any realistic fashion.
Anybody can see for anything, so I'm not, it's going to be tough to make it totally bulletproof. I mean, there's always going to be somebody that's going to be unhappy no matter what we do right now. So anyway, that would be my only concern is that this isn't, right now this is just placeholder language, and it's providing some goals. I'd like to see greater savings, but I don't see how you're going to get there if you just cap them off at this amount.
Well, if they can achieve this and you can come up, as they're talking, with more ways to get more, I think that people would listen to those. But at the moment, at least trying to get people to be realistic. And then we're trying to get more savings out of the long-term deal, because on the short term, you still got litigate,
Well, we were suggesting like new nursing home eligibility, other things that we could take a look at to make.
Well, that's
sure
what the long-term stakeholder group is to talk about, is kind of to do that. But.
Well, okay, but and they're going to come back, but you're still going to limit the amount. Anyway, that was my concern.
Yeah, no, I understand. On the short term, it does limit it, but it's trying to limit it to some number so we can get a realistic budget that doesn't over-rely, as last year's did, on savings that will never be realized.
I just didn't want to stymie anybody's creativity and how we might be able to provide a high-level program for less money by saying, okay, but don't save me any more money than this. Okay, and that's where I was trying to get to. So.
Yeah, it's a 14% reduction in general fund, so, I mean, it's pretty high based on what we're doing with other things. And this one, you're talking about real fragile people who have Lanterman rights and Olmstead rights and all sorts of complications when you start trying to do as was done last year with proposals that tend to violate the Olmstead Act, the Lanterman Act, and get you caught up in a lot of problem areas. So
And-
the idea is to be realistic. I understand the desire for more. I don't know what the policy changes you can make to do more that would be realistic are. That's really the issue of the day. So.
Now, until we come up with a lot more accountability for a lot more people, I got to tell you,
Fair.
you're never going to achieve it. And if you just keep throwing more money, if you don't push them to the point of having to really operate these programs in top efficiency, you're always going to have a lot of waste, which means you got that much less money to help the people that actually need the help. So that's really where I'm coming from. I'm not convinced that anybody has actually looked at this thing with the idea of, okay, how can we still provide a high level of service and program for less money and make sure that the people we're actually trying to help are getting the service. And I'm just not convinced yet, based on everything I've been hearing in the last couple of years particularly, that people that are operating these programs are actually doing it with that in mind. It's more like, how can I grow the program? How can I do outreach? How can I spend more money? Get more people into it, even ones that don't need it. And there seems to be more of an incentive to grow it regardless of the need. And so that's where my concern is.
Yeah, I don't know. Talk to the counties.
Yeah,
Mr. Blumenfield?
I just have to point out, though, when we're talking about a program that in itself creates tremendous savings from cost shifting, cost shifting to nursing homes and other places. So when we talk about trying to squeeze out more savings, I'm all for getting rid of fraud and waste and anytime we can do that. But when we just start pushing the savings, quote-unquote savings on this, we have to realize we're actually not causing savings. We're going to create more costs. They're just shifted somewhere else.
Well, that was the reason why I suggested setting up a criteria for being nursing home eligible, because that's where the cost factors come into play. So, and that was the reason why we went down that path, because I was concerned with the same thing.
One of the cost factors. I mean, there's emergency rooms.
I'm giving you one example. I'm just saying that was the reason why we went in that direction, because I was sensitive to what you said about, driving cost up indirectly and causing higher cost pressures in another area. And that was the main objection that I've heard since participating in these budget hearing meetings for the last 18 months is that the concern was that we would drive people from this program into nursing homes. And so my suggestion is that then fine, let's just deal with this so that if they are nursing home eligible, I suggested PACE, we'll let them make the qualifications or whatever.
Okay.
I'm not an expert in this area, but I've been talking to people. They've suggested that there are people that are in this program that frankly it was never truly intended to really service, and so in limited dollars, if the concern was nursing home by example, there could be others, you add them. But at least, qualify for a certain group. Right now, there is no qualification.
Well, I think the reform, and that's why you need this long-term group to restudy this, because 4 years ago or so, we did that in an effort to do uniformity across the state to get some cost containment. We came up with a system of functions and said, and basically a county social worker goes into anybody's home who applies for this service and says, okay, I've observed you. I think you need some assistance in this area because you can't walk, because you can't cook, because you have Alzheimer's, and I'm afraid you'll burn yourself on the stove. But whatever they observe, and they create the hours based on the needs of the patient and on looking at their home situation. If you're totally alone, if somebody else lives with you, all those things matter. But the county social worker does that evaluation, and we have finally, 4 years ago, for the first time, I think, set up criteria that folks used. And now folks are trying to reduce below that. We have had growth in the caseload, but a lot of that has to do with the demographic of an aging population who are increasingly lower income and therefore eligible. And so the point of the longer-term working group is to get at those issues and look at the medical, what Mr. Blumenfield was saying, to look at ways that we can treat this more like a managed care, more similar to the PACE system. But how do we merge the public Medi-Cal IHSS with the public Medi-Cal medical services? And you're going to have to accommodate in some fashion how you deal with the region center issues, because the regional center issues and the folks who need these services from a DD perspective are not there just because they're Medi-Cal eligible or because of that. So there are people who receive these services under the Olmstead Act, if you will, rather than because they are seniors on Medi-Cal. So both of those worlds, that's sort of two worlds, have to be merged. And at least on the senior, more medically based side, there is an opportunity as we merge those same seniors and disabled populations into managed care to try to merge the IHSS, the management of the hours, the decisions about what the needs are within that system, because they will save us dollars in the managed care Medi-Cal side when people don't fall and they don't go to emergency rooms and they take their medication on time and all of those things that the doctors or the managed care provider case managers can help kind of figure out. That is the theory of the longer term stakeholders group, to have that conversation, because it's too hard for us to have it here and still get a budget before we go bankrupt.
Can I call the question?
Yes, Senator Leno calls the question. Motion's on the table. Mr. Blumenfield moves 1, 2, 3. Mr. Nielsen is a no.
Madam Chair?
Mr. Dutton is no. Yes,
And Nick
finance is a no. They don't get a vote, but all right, we will hear.
So a couple things. First, we recognize the need to retain a viable program into the future, and we appreciate the recognition for long-term reforms looking further down the road. In the short term, however, we were looking more for a balanced approach with both a reduction component and a potential revenue option, such as the provider fee. And so to the extent the provider fee option is able to generate $200 million in savings, for example, then that's the bulk of your $250, and we wouldn't consider that a balanced approach. The other thing, just to clarify...
We're just sort of not interested in gratuitously cutting to cut. If you get the savings, why would we want to just reduce just for the sake of reducing if we're getting the 70% of the general fund? I mean, of the 1.4 billion, this reduction is a 17% reduction in general fund expenditures.
Again,
so it seems to me that's the goal of the budget, not gratuitously cutting services to people who might need them.
And I don't mean my comments to speak to that, but keeping in mind that it's maybe 17% of the 10-11 budget when we have enhanced FMAP, but when ARA goes away in the out year, it would grow to a $1.8 billion program, all else being equal.
So then it'd be a 10% cut for that.
and
10, 20, no, whatever.
And just to clarify my previous comments on litigation, as you mentioned correctly, our argument before the Supreme Court was that we didn't need to do a wage study. But keep in mind that the reduction enacted by the legislature last year on the wages was not a rate reduction issue, unlike Medi-Cal. Having said that, we are still doing the wage study. So.
Well, I'm sure this will get further discussion. I mean, it's if you're not going to take it to the court, I mean, why not just deal with it? So that's all. It isn't a reduction. It is a state refusal to participate at a higher level. I get that part. But so, I mean, that's why people accepted it as a possibility last year. But. All right. Mr. Blumenfield moves on a 3-1, 3-2 vote. The motion will be approved. For now, we'll see where we end up. At least it seems like we've made some progress. Let's see what that trailer bill looks like. We'll have to bring it back anyway. Finance, so maybe that'll help. When we see the real trailer bill, maybe we'll get more clarity. All right. Page 4 of the Human Services agenda is a related issue of some kind, but I've forgotten what it is. LAO, the...
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Jenny Bella with the Analyst's Office. This issue is related to some trailer bill language that was adopted by the Assembly requiring the Department of Social Services to create a cost-benefit model to be able to analyze future anti-fraud activities presented by the Department. The Senate did not adopt any related language on this issue. We had a conference compromise, and I have additional copies if you need it, that is, instead of trailer bill language, supplemental report language stating the legislative intent that the costs and benefits of future anti-fraud proposals are considered prior to presenting those proposals to the legislature. So I don't know if you guys still have the copies or if you need some, but I do have some here.
I have one. Is there any objection to the LAO language? The S should be supplemental report language. Finance?
We can live with it. We'd go support Senate, but we can live with the compromise.
That's why I did that. Senator Leno moves the LAO compromise. Let's see where that gets to.
Senator
Ms. Skinner.
Well, okay. The Assembly was trying to achieve that we have some, that we get some data on what was the cost effectiveness of the anti-fraud work, okay? The LAO's compromise basically states that prior to proposing any future, rather than giving us any kind of real information about the cost effectiveness of the existing. So while I appreciate, I'm willing to go with the supplemental report, but I'd prefer that that supplemental report refer, or rather be not just on future, but rather a supplemental report that gave us the effectiveness of the anti-fraud activity and the estimated savings associated with it. So, yeah, I guess it's a trailer bill, but it's a trailer bill, but asking for the supplemental report. Yeah.
Senator Dutton.
Yeah, I guess when you're doing a cost analysis with regard to fraud and stuff, I mean, the fact of the matter is what's going to end up happening is that you put in tougher requirements, things like this, you're going to have a deterrent and people aren't going to sign up for the program. So therefore, how do you do a cost analysis, a benefit analysis for a fraud program? Now, what we ought to be doing is actually a cost analysis, beneficial analysis on when we go to expand programs, okay, because then we can actually see if the dollars invested into that situation are actually coming back. But that's the only concern. There's no real problem here with what the LA is suggesting, but it is to do a cost-benefit analysis on fraud. Just I don't think it's going to. I don't see how you're going to be able to do it. So.
The trouble is, last year's budget was passed where the anti-fraud measures were scored with assuming a 10% savings. Yeah. So. If for some reason we didn't achieve that, and I don't know what the cost of the anti-fraud measures, they cost something to implement. So it could be that it actually increased our costs, and we didn't achieve any savings. Don't know, but it's worth it to know.
We did find that out this year. Let me just to keep all our records straight. We did figure that out this year with respect to one of the proposals. Both houses subsequently withdrew the idea of fingerprinting recipients because everybody decided it cost way more money than it was worth.
Yeah.
So that's already been taken out because we did get that analysis at subcommittee from everybody. But Senator Dutton?
Well, not everybody, but it's there again, when you start putting these added requirements in, people do not sign up with a program, and I don't know how you're going to make that kind of determination without doing some kind of review of the people that didn't sign up for the program that maybe previously were there, and I doubt if anybody's doing that kind of an analysis. So, I think from what I've been hearing is that actually some of the fraud prevention measures that have been put into place, program changes, it actually did create a deterrent, okay, from people coming in, and therefore you don't have to worry about actually going after them. It creates it's the deterrent. So I just don't want to end up creating all these additional entitlement programs and have the money once again go to people that don't really deserve it, shouldn't get it, and certainly I don't think anybody intended for them to get it, and yet that gives us less money for the people that need it. So that's where I'm concerned.
So I have agreement with that. I would have no, we're not removing any additional anti-fraud provisions. We're just asking the difference between trailer bill and supplemental report is trailer bill actually requires the agency to do it. Supplemental is, kind of like an afterthought. So we still achieve the same end. It doesn't contradict the concern that you have, Senator Dutton, as far as I can tell.
Well, the only thing about it is we took away the $10 million from the counties, and they actually did develop programs and stuff. Now they can't really implement it. Can't do it in just a one-year deal. So there again, it sounds like we're just kind of like going around in a circle here.
Finance, do you have any sense of what your assumptions were that caused you to estimate the savings based on the individual? I mean, how did you do the analysis that got you to the proposals that were adopted last year?
The savings that were adopted were not developed by a per component basis. For example, we didn't assume that the fingerprinting was going to save X of the $130 million. Rather, all of the anti-fraud measures combined would result in a decrease in 10% of the basic cost of the program. So that's how the savings was developed.
But you run into this problem that both Senator Dutton and Ms. Skinner said, which is, oh gosh, gee, is it because we've decided that people aren't going to sign up, or did anybody actually prosecute anybody somewhere, or I don't know how to analyze this, and I don't know how much it would cost you to do the study that the Assembly's proposing, which was one of my concerns. Leo?
Just a note on the estimated savings from the anti-fraud activities. We had estimated in our office when we do our 5-year forecast, instead of the 10% savings from the activities, we estimated it closer to 2.5% or 3%, so significantly less than what was estimated.
And what model do you use?
We were actually basing it just on what our knowledge of the program is and the types of proposals that were put forward. Another reason we're recommending supplemental report language here is also because we are concerned about the cost of actually establishing that model to do the cost-benefit analysis at the state level.
And again, in support of our compromise, I think one of the frustrations the legislature had when they were hearing this discussion in subcommittee this year was it's 10%. We haven't really assigned it to one piece. We feel the supplemental report language sort of gets you on record saying, we want to see next time there's an anti-fraud proposal, we kind of want to see it a little more itemized out. Which piece do we think is going to cost what, or at least why? And then also, sort of to Assemblywoman Skinner's point, some decisions seem to have already been made on the current year. Certain elements of the fraud things have been taken out, so we felt like you didn't necessarily need to study since some of those issues have been dropped. But we get your point that more information might not hurt. The question being the cost of getting that information.
Have we ever
we were worried they might put forward a BCP if you went with your language of additional people in their cost estimates unit.
Yeah, that's what I'm concerned about.
That was on our
in
our
approach, this would be a bill on suspense because the study costs more than you get from it. Finance?
We would echo the comments that LAO made regarding the state staff needed, or staff resources needed to comply with the trailer bill. So we'd be okay with the supplemental report language.
Of course.
Have we ever done, I just want to ask, in any other program where we do anti-fraud, do we have some sort of model on this kind of stuff? I don't know how you do it.
I would say usually in the estimating process, we usually look for a little bit tighter link, at least in terms of the reasoning behind the estimated savings and the proposed actions, a little tighter than here. This appears more like a budget compromise that was enacted last year, and it's the assumption that's been carried forward. And again, not that we have data to look at, we felt the 10% was too high.
And I can tell you the similar thing that comes to my mind is an issue you don't want to talk about, SFIS, where in LA County they had an Affirm pilot project, and LA was able to determine a certain level of savings. So that's what was extrapolated to a statewide figure when SFIS was implemented.
Food stamp fingerprint thing?
Correct.
You actually found a savings from that? Well, yeah, because nobody wanted to have their fingerprints taken. We disagree. That's not, yeah. Well,
Look, comment.
yes, Ms. Skinner.
I'm finding myself in a kind of funny dilemma here because the argument to not go with the trailer bill is that, well, that the agency might come back and say, to do this, we will need staff, which means then there'll be a cost of extra people, right? But the irony here is that somebody, and it would appear it's the agency, did some version of this in order to come up with an estimate of a 10% reduction. So they clearly had the staff to do that. Why would we need to give them more staff to figure out how to do what it would appear they already did? We just want to see the data. How did they do it?
And how
They
would
just told you. Picked a number and got there.
Although just
I don't know.
to
Mr. Bloomfield?
bolster what Ms. Skinner's saying, this applies, and we can make it explicit, upon enactment. It's next year's budget we're talking about. So they're going to have to go through this process again, and this trailer bill language would just say that you need to be explicit about that process. Right? I mean, they're not going to rely on the previous year's. Somebody's got to calculate it, and if they do come forward with the BCP, they're going to have to justify that in some way. So
We think, again, the compromise puts you on record for the kind of information you want for the next anti-fraud proposal they put before you.
Could we, if we made that language say, including those anti-fraud proposals that are continuing, so that we get something on the existing ones and not just new ideas ones, maybe that would, does that help anything? I mean, just so that if you have a continuing anti-fraud proposal, as in those which have already been approved and not enjoined, if you're given that they were considered to be ongoing savings, there ought to be, seems not inappropriate, an analysis each budget year, or at least next budget year, of has it done what you said it would do, kind of thing, right? That would, and then also ask for these sort of breakdown estimates of any future proposals. Is that?
You could ask for that.
I mean, it's a
we don't know what they'd be able to get.
I don't know what they give it. Well, but they're going to have to do it in their budget. I mean, or there'll have to be something in the budget that either continues to believe that savings will be whatever they are proposed to be from those measures which were enacted last year, or not, right?
To some extent, you'll get
you
that
have to have that analysis on the natural.
They'll have on the natural a premise estimate for the policies that are sustained.
Right. So the point is, when they do that premise in the January budget, it ought to include the analysis. The supplemental report thing would be the analysis of the basis upon which they got to that estimate. I mean, that would be kind of. Does that
probably
help?
Amended along those lines this line.
Does that help?
I like the force. I mean, teeth or no teeth. So what's the? It's sort of teeth or no teeth. And given that they had to have staff who'd come up with this anyway, it doesn't seem to me they could justify getting new staff. So I'm not worried about that cost. And I'd rather have teeth because it just benefits us. It ensures that it will be done.
This seems like an awkward thing to put in statute because it's basically a budget reporting issue.
And I would remind the committee that one of the components denied by the legislature was state resources to implement the anti-fraud. So you're asking for more work from the state, and you gave them less resources already.
Does not yet. Mr. Nielsen, you haven't weighed in here. My amended LAO.
I concur with Senator Dutton. I believe that this would become an impediment, actually, rather than an asset. that would be used as a way to stop. So I just as soon not have it in.
How about uncodified?
Uncodified trailer bill, does that do anything for anybody? I don't know. How does that work? How different is that from SRL?
If it's still in statute, Ledge Council will track it as a required report.
Well,
And the governor,
I suppose that's not a bad
And the
thing.
governor has to decide whether to approve it or not through the trailer bill process. SRL is your statement of intent. It doesn't go through the governor.
Your veto bait choice. Veto bait, or you want to report?
You want to? Okay. We'll do the report with the additional language.
Okay. SRL, ALAO compromise with the as amended to acknowledge that next year's, when you're acknowledging the existing anti-fraud stuff, you will include something that explains how you get to whatever number you believe belongs in there in January. Y'all work on that part. I don't know.
Okay.
All right. On a Strafford's a no, Senator Dutton's no. Even as SRL, we're still on SRL? All right. 3, 2, 3, 1. Supplemental report language, but including the existing one to be brought forward as the January budget comes forward. Okay. All right. Last but not least, we are desperately trying to not have any more human services issues open after today. Page 7, the Food Stamp Administration. Senator Leno moves the Senate version.
Just a couple comments.
Mr. Blumenfield.
As you know, there's been significant interest in the Assembly to do something positive to ensure that more families have access to food stamps. Unfortunately, the semi-annual reporting proposal has raised issues and includes an upfront cost that doesn't seem to make it feasible to support it as part of this budget package. The Assembly did take action to push this issue into conference, but there doesn't seem to be a place to land here that achieves the consensus across the houses. So I have a couple of questions for the LAO. Can you speak briefly to the value of the semi-annual reporting charge and the reporting change and some of the potential risks of pursuing this policy?
Semi-annual reporting will essentially move from our quarterly reporting to every 6 months.
How long didn't we used to be there? And what years was it?
I don't recall that we were ever semi-annual for food.
Oh, okay. We never got
it's
to
different for
semi-annual.
Medi-Cal, which I don't know as well. Essentially, that approach makes a lot of sense from the food stamp supplemental nutrition standpoint. Since the benefits are paid for by the federal government, it allows more people to receive the benefits. On the other hand, though, it is not without some cost. There's sort of two types of costs accrue as you expand eligibility. One is there are some admin costs. The state has to pay that and share that with the counties and the federal government. Also, we do have the California Food Assistance Program for legal non-citizens, and usually if you make a change, statutorily it's linked, so we would make the same change to the California Food Assistance Program, and that leads to a benefit cost that the state does have to pay. So that's sort of the tension in the area.
Are there other innovations other than the SAR that can be achieved with modest expense?
Recently, DSS announced a change in the way they're dealing with people who have been recently terminated from the program. Instead of having to completely reapply, they only it's sort of like they don't have to do a complete reapplication. They're able to restart. The Department of Social Services pursued various waivers, such as waiving the face-to-face interview either at the front end or at redetermination. Those are the kind of things they've been working on. That's what I have off the top of my head.
Percent electronic benefit card yet on this program?
We are.
Yeah.
So once upon a time, quarterly was an improvement, but the rest of the world has moved ahead of us.
We were
to
monthly.
semi-annual. We were
yeah.
monthly, so
That's
this was an improvement
we
at
moved
the time.
from, prospective budgeting was the other name for quarterly. Yeah.
Right. Semi-annual is where most of the rest of the country has gone. We get that, I think, right?
I believe that's correct.
Yeah, so we're just behind. Reluctantly, very reluctantly, the Assembly. Mr. Nielsen, Senate version. Senate version is the, okay. Mr. Dutton, okay. Assembly, okay. The motion is Senate version, 5-0 on the Senate side. On 4-0 on the Assembly side with great reluctance on behalf of 2 or 3. All right. All right. We're done with Human Services. Moving forward for the moment. Let's go to resources, and then that'll be it for today, folks. So if anybody's waiting out there for anything besides resources, you're welcome to leave. Because that's as far as we'll get today. Getting rid of... No. All right. Resources. Page 7 and page 8. Well, I don't know. I guess they're different, but they are both with respect to AB 118, fuel technology. It's my understanding there is a proposed compromise, at least on page 7, assembly dollars and some trailer bill language that is being passed out as we speak. Oops, this was my old one. I'll just confuse myself if I use that. Hold on. All right, do I have this? Okay. Here we go. Grab that one there. Is that this one? No, that's page 8. Okay, page 7. The trailer bill that's been handed out before is to align the release of the investment plan with the budget process and require reporting of changes to the plan. This was the issue that caused the dollar difference to exist, even, frankly, was just to make sure that we get an investment plan so we can see how proposals for expenditures align with the plan, right? So the motion on page 7 is assembly version with the trailer bill to align the release of the investment plan with the budget process so that they're more consistently together and we don't all get confused. Is there any objection? Mr. Huff adjusts. Mr. Dutton. It's governor's dollars are assembly dollars, right? This is governor's.
That is correct, Madam Chair.
This is governor's dollars with trailer bill, just to have them give it to us in a manner that we can react to better. But it's 3-2 on the Senate side, 3-1 on the Assembly side. All right, page 8 is the language that was just passed out, members. Yeah, trailer bill to accelerate schedules. Somebody want to explain this? LAO?
Madam Chair, members, Mark Newton with the LAO. Yes, the compromise language relates to a component of the investment plan, and this is the ethanol producer incentive program. And essentially what the language would do is to provide some guidelines and incentives for this program for which the biorefiners receiving loans would be subject to. And these criteria for the loans are consistent with a recent proposal of the Energy Commission for this program.
All right. Finance?
Ken DeRosa with the Department of Finance. Mr. Newton's correct that there are programmatic changes that were applied by the Energy Commission relative to the program, relative to how the biorefiners are working with the Energy Commission. While we know that there are still some aspects of this that we would like to discuss with consultant staff, generally this is rather consistent with how the Energy Commission is operating.
Okay, so subject to detailed trailer bill review by all parties. The motion, excuse me, the motion is assembly dollars with said trailer bill. Is there any objection? Okay, 3-2 on the Senate side, 3-1 on the Assembly side. Okay. The motion will be approved. Page 9. Senator Lowenthal, this was from your subcommittee. Senator Lowenthal moves the Senate version. This trailer bill we handed out a month ago, this is the one to try to encourage the compliance with the ag burning permits by accelerating money to biomass facilities in the Central Valley, which will allow them then to implement their ag burning. It is Energy Commission money, 118 money, I think. Is it 118?
Renewable Resources Trust Fund.
Renewable Resources Trust Fund.
Yeah. Simply for the record.
It's not general fund for anybody's keeping track.
Merely for the record, I think we would remain concerned about what is ostensibly a substantive policy matter that's being articulated through the budget like this. And we are still unclear on what some of these incentives are relative to the biomass program that are being offered.
I think it's just to get those businesses that want to reopen biomass facilities up and running. I mean, it's a way of, it's businesses, it's jobs, and it's biomass. So, but I think the problem has been without the biomass facility, there is no way for the Air District to comply with existing law, which requires them to reduce their particulate matter, right?
I think the aspect has more to do with the fuels relative to these facilities. There are a number of facilities within the central region. The issue, I think, for the producers is getting the fuels, from the orchards and from the ag industry over to the generation facilities.
All right. I don't know.
Simply to state that we think that there's more of a policy issue than a budget issue at this point.
Was it a policy issue? I don't even see that. Don't we have an existing? I thought we had a biomass program. Don't we encourage through a variety of these kinds of trust funds and biomass?
I believe that there is.
No, I know I've gotten grants to various biomass facility and.
Right, I think, but in terms of targeting a specific industry and targeting specific regions, as this is intended to do, is really more a nuanced aspect of the program. It doesn't really have a policy, or it doesn't have a fiscal implication. We just
No.
We just have issue with the discussions here within the context of the budget versus the policy committee.
All right. That's happened before. Anybody? Yes? Mr. Nielsen's a no. On a 3-2, 3-2, 3-1, no. All right, then that'll stay open. Yeah, Mr. Nielsen was a no. Sounds like Ms. Skidder's a no. That means there's not three, so, or 4 no's. So, It's 3-2 on the Senate side and 0-4 on the Assembly side, so that motion fails. Page 11. Yeah. All right. Page 11. Senator Lowenthal moves these, or Senator Leno moves the Senate version. We're on page 11. Recycling.
Yeah, Senate version.
Okay.
Senate version.
Mr. Blumenfield now moves, moving the Senate version. On a 504, page 11, Mr. Nielsen. 5040, the Senate version is adopted. Next. All right, page 13, Governor's Emergency Response Initiative. Mr. Blumenfield moves the Assembly version.
Comic book just, but I still like it. But.
All right, the page 13, the Governor's Emergency Response Initiative to fund CAL FIRE and associated positive government services. Mr. Dutton.
I just want to know from, in the past, there's always been a question as to whether this is a tax or a fee, and I just want to know if there's been any change on the part of Ledge Council or anybody else regarding this particular issue. Is there anybody else that is, anything changed since before?
Finance? LAO.
Senator Dutton, Mark Newton, LAO. Not that we're aware of. Our most current legal opinion from Ledge Council on this issue has opined that this would be a tax.
Okay, thank you.
Finance? Is your proposal?
Madam Chair, we continue to believe that there is a spectrum between fees and taxes, and that this lies on that spectrum reasonably close to the fee end, so that a reasonable argument could be made that it's a fee.
It's keyed 2/3 no matter what you do. But good try. It will be keyed 2/3 again. But is that a 3-2-3-1? 3-2-3-1.
The governor says it's a fee. I'm inclined to believe him.
Yeah, well, I've had to vote on several of his 2/3 vote fee bills. So this was not in the Senate budget because we substituted alternative taxes. We did understand this to be a tax. Our view was that this was a new tax, and we were trying to stick with old ones. But we're happy to adopt this if we can get there again. It's nothing wrong with it. It's just it is a new tax. That's why the Senate didn't adopt it. We have voted for it 3 times in the last several years. Governor's never been able to produce the votes to get it through, but we're happy to give him one more try. Page 18.
And he says it's a fee.
State Parks. Mr. Lowenthal, Mr. Leno moved the Senate version.
We accept the Senate.
Anybody? All right. We have 3 votes on the Senate side, 4. Mr. Huff is absent, so we're 4-0 on the Senate side for the moment, and 4-0 on the Assembly side. We'll leave that roll open in case Mr. Huff wants to add on. All right. Page 26. I think we'll skip over this one for right now. I don't know. Finance? Yeah, Mr. Nielsen?
Page 19, the Red Bluff diversion.
Oh, did we?
Identified that there was some funding in Prop 13 that could apply to that project.
We did. Oh, okay. Finance?
Madam Chair, Robert Schlodow with the Department of Finance. Yes, I think we now believe that Prop 13 funds, there's a portion of Prop 13 that could be used for this project.
How much? Can we take an action, or do we just reopen? I think 6.5?
I think it's $6.5 million.
All right, Mr. Nielsen moves that we reopen page 19 on the Red Bluff issue, which at earlier points we had kept open on the theory that there might be some of these funds available. The last time we did this, we closed it without funding it because we thought there was no such available funds. Is that accurate? Mr. Nielsen now moves to reopen.
That's but
and
a small
appropriate.
part, but it looks like the Bureau will come in with a lot of, to finish the project. It's already in process.
If we get, yeah, that was the problem with it. That's why we tried to keep it open and get something to fund it with. So if there are, in fact, $6.5 million in available Prop 13 funds, then they should go toward this in order to keep drawing down the matches that exist. Is that acceptable to everybody? Yeah. On a 5-0-4-0 vote, we will reopen page 19 and adopt the $6.5 million in Prop 13 funds to keep this project moving forward. Oh, sorry. Apparently there was trailer bill on page 18? No. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, Mr. Huff, while you were out on page 18, we did the Senate version. Okay. So that is now 5-0 on the Senate side, 4-0 on the Assembly side. All right. Page 26. Yeah, fine. Do I still want? We'll leave that open. Nobody's resolved it yet. Page 30. Green chemistry. Lano moves the Assembly version. Mr. Lano moves the Assembly version. Is there any objection? It was just kept open for purposes of some information. The dollar amount was insignificant. It was really just to put it in conference while we got some information. It's my understanding the subcommittee who did this has gotten what they... That's right. Mr. Lowenthal was involved with that. The subcommittee has received what it wanted to know. So, Mr. Leno moves the Assembly version. Okay. Any issue? Mr. Okay, 3-2. This is the governor's, the Assembly version is the governor's budget, right? Finance?
That is correct, Madam
Just checking. All right, 3-2, 3-1. That will be adopted. Governor wins another one. See that? He keeps complaining. All right, page 33. There is a proposed compromise on this RPS issue. Lelio, do you have that with SRL? Well, the SRL is separate. If people want to pull that out as separate vote, is that? All right, the motion is, the compromise is Assembly plus $423,000 to kind of there was a back and forth on whether this number was accurate. Leo?
Yes, Madam Chair, that number, my understanding of the proposed compromise is to simply give the Public Utilities Commission base budget funding, which is $423,000, to develop or pursue development of the 33% renewable portfolio standard. What it would deny is a BCP for an additional $1.7 million that was proposed.
Okay. So $1.7 million less than the governor, right? Mm-hmm. Which is Assembly plus $423,000 to address the PUC's issue that we weren't trying to upset their baseline staff for purposes of implementing existing law, which is the 20%. We just don't want to add staff for something that isn't in statute yet. And when we all get agreement on the 33%, then those staff should go with that legislation. Was the theory. All right, and there is proposed SRL. It is PUC, so it was put with this item, but it is sort of a different issue. I don't know if people want to divide the question.
Should I speak to it?
Yeah, Mr. Leno, why don't you speak to the SRL so people understand what the issue is?
Sure. You all may remember that back in 2002, AB 117 was passed, which creates a pathway for local agencies to pursue community choice aggregation. Marin County, in my district, has taken the lead on this, the first in the state, very successfully, in fact, and San Francisco is soon to follow. And unfortunately, though the statute requires that IOUs cooperate fully with the cities and counties that may choose to do this, that has not been the case in Marin. And so the CPUC has had to deal with the outright interference by PG&E repeatedly. And so I think this SRL will assist the PUC through a process of reporting to the fiscal and the policy committees the compliance of the IOUs to the statute. And so it has to do with opting in and opting out provisions, and also to the degree that the IOUs impacted would be cooperating fully.
Anybody? Mr. Dutton, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I'd just like to separate the questions. This particular item-wise, I think it's probably extremely important. I just not sure it's a budget item that I want to mix in with the other. So.
I think the reason it's SRL is to try to get, it goes back to what we were saying before about getting some control over agencies who seem not to hear anything that people say sometimes. So, the first motion is Assembly plus $423,000, which is Governor minus 1.7. Oh, on that part?
Let's just resolve.
How about the SRL?
Let's resolve the PUC one. That's to do with RPS.
Go on the mic. What is it that?
Assemblymember Fuentes wants the question separated.
Senator Dutton already did that. I was separating the question. The first question is, are we agreed that it will be Assembly plus $423,000 for purposes of funding the RPS positions that are baseline, which is basically Governor minus 1.7 million?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. On that we have 5040. All right. And then the second question is, shall we adopt the SRL as outlined by Senator Leno?
I'd like to hold this open
and
for
that you want to hold open. Okay. All right. So we have two remaining open issues on this agenda, and we will be where we are. Okay.
Biomass cap and trade in.
Yeah, I know. Biomass. Oh, three open issues. Right. And we now have, there are 3 or 4 or 5 supplemental issues here that I don't know if folks want to, I can identify them for folks. They are on that sort of the add-on list of things that have arisen as they arise, which are all in this arena. The parks, well, there are folks who have asked for the Environmental Education Initiative, the question of strengthening the private donations protection, because there appears to be folks who wish to make private donations to the Environmental Education Initiative, but are concerned that somehow funds they're put into might be swept to the general fund and want greater protection than current law provides. One can imagine why they might have that concern. So the question of developing trailer bill or doing something like a State Parks Foundation, I think there's a proposal that's been floating around on that issue. I'll just identify all 3 that are in this area. There's that one. There's the what is the conservation? There's one with respect to the Energy Commission on a conservation assistance account. There is the Department of Parks and Recreation, who has asked that we adopt some trailer bill in accordance with an agreement that has been reached between the Anza-Borrego State Park and the Ocotillo Wells Off-Highway Vehicle Park for division of some newly acquired lands. The Freeman acquisition, it's known as. Once upon a time, we used to know this as Truck Haven. It kind of has changed names lots of times. And then the fourth issue is the State Water Resources Control Board, a landfill compromise, and then there's a proposed reappropriation of some prior, a list of parks appropriations. Why don't we, you look a bit puzzled, so let's put them all out so everybody sees them all and make sure that we're comfortable with all of them tomorrow.
Our staff has barely had time to even
look at them. Yeah, okay. So those are 4 items that are all, and we already held open the Secretary of State one, but there are, those 4 items are all in this in resources agenda. So the next resources agenda, why don't we put the 3 that are left open from the prior, and we'll add in the other ones, and meanwhile we'll make sure everybody gets a chance to look at all the proposed languages, reappropriations, and such. Yeah, Senate staff has copies of everything. If anybody doesn't, well, Mr. Ehlers will be happy to email to any and all, and folks can figure it out. All right. I think that takes us just about as far as we can go today. I think that all right. We will recess for this evening, members, at this point. That leaves us with these open items left in resources. I think we've basically closed health and human services. We have closed transportation a while ago. And we've pretty much closed local government, general government, other than one of the newer issues, which was the Secretary of State's business filings. We need to come back to that tomorrow. I'd like to have people get whatever information they need to get on the Secretary of State's issue and these assorted resources issues, in the hopes that those will close out fairly quickly tomorrow. And then that will leave us with a couple of local government issues, revenues, and education. We cannot meet tomorrow both with Assembly appropriations and assorted other commitments that folks have. The suggestion at the earliest that we would meet tomorrow is upon adjournment of Senate Health. Senate Health will meet in this room at 1:30. They only have 3 bills. If Assembly approps is done by then and everybody else is where they need to be, then we will meet upon adjournment of Senate Health, which would be, I would imagine, not before 2 p.m. for those of you who are trying to keep track of it by clock. And we will try to get notice out as soon as possible to folks. I suspect it will not actually be before 2:30 tomorrow. So tentatively, approximately 2:30 tomorrow, depending on how Senate Health goes. And hopefully we will be able to get through the education, local government, and pick up these few issues that remained open today. Approximately 2:30, but we'll try to send out as soon as we know. We are upon adjournment of Senate Health, or whatever variation to that time is necessary. But my guess is it's approximately 2:30. All right. See you all then.